Hello Rebel Divas and welcome to my Writer's Den. Today I'm going to share with you a story from my book, The Accidental Traveler. Now this book has short vignettes, stories, flash fiction, all based on true experiences that I've had traveling the world and back, and I've been traveling since I was a little one. So today I'm going to share with you the third episode of The Mermaid of Luxembourg. Now the last 2 weeks I shared with you the story of my then husband Mark and I traveling to Luxembourg, doing some sightseeing, wanting to eat at a fancy restaurant, being turned away, and walking into a bistro with the storytelling maître d'. So this is the third episode of The Mermaid of Luxembourg, and if you haven't seen the first 2 episodes, please go and see them, otherwise you won't probably enjoy this as much. Okay, so are you ready for a story? Alright. The maître d' took a sip of his coffee and wiped his moustache before continuing his story. The old woman, the stepmother-in-law, decided the best time to get rid of her daughter-in-law was on a full moon night. Get rid of her? I asked him. Eliminate her, the maître d' replied with his steely eyes. Even Mark was listening intently now. One evening, the maître d' continued, when the moon looked like a wheel of ripe cheese, the old woman decided it was time to do the deed. With her own withering hands, she prepared a hot mug of tea for the Countess Melusina, her daughter-in-law. And in this drink was enough poison to kill a small army. The maître d' cleared his throat. If the others, the old man at the table next door and the young waiter leaning against the bar, had heard this story before, they didn't show it. Remember, they were from Luxembourg, but all eyes were on the maître d', and he was clearly enjoying the attention. He continued, after dinner that evening, Melusina walked towards the chambers like she always did. The old woman, her stepmother-in-law, carefully carrying the mug of poisoned hot tea, kept a few steps behind her, making sure she wouldn't be heard or seen. Just before reaching her bedroom, Melusina turned abruptly and opened a side door which the old woman had not known existed. And this door opened to an underground stone well that went into the caverns below. Melusina opened the door, stepped down those stone stairways, and disappeared into darkness. The door closed with a soft thud. The old woman could barely stand still while she was waiting for her daughter-in-law to get to the bottom of the stairs or wherever she was going, and to make sure that she didn't know she was being followed. So she just barely waited for a few minutes, and then she carefully opened that door. When she felt sufficient time had passed, and she climbed down slowly into that dark stairwell. It took her ages to get to the bottom of the stairwell. She was carrying that tea as well, you see. And when she got to the bottom of the stairwell, there was another door to God knows where. She opened that door and she saw herself in a lightly lit cavern. There was no one around. There was nothing around except a large rock-hewn chamber with several corridors leading out to darkness. And that was when she noticed a small door on a corner, a small door with light coming out of its keyhole. The maître d' paused to take a sip of his coffee. My own coffee was cold and long forgotten. I was hanging on to every word. The maître d' said she put a scrawny hand, the old woman, put a scrawny hand on that doorknob of that small door from where there was light coming out of the keyhole, and she turned it. The maître d''s moustache seemed to twitch with excitement. He leaned forward, we leaned forward with him, and what a sight greeted the hag's eyes. There lay Melusina in a bathtub made of white marble, with her fishtail hanging out on one end. The maître d' paused and looked around the room to make sure we understood this transformation. A fishtail? I said. My dear friend, the maître d' said, do you know her daughter-in-law, this old woman's daughter-in-law, was not human. She was but a mermaid. The old woman was shocked. She was horrified. She dropped her poison-filled cup on the floor where it shattered into 1,000 pieces. Melusina turned her head to look at the old woman. The consequence of this small act was irreparable. An evil heart cannot stand the look of a golden-hearted mermaid, you see. One look from Melusina's beautiful eyes and the old woman's heart solidified into stone. She fell to the ground with a cry, never to get up again. The maitre d' sat back and shook his head as if at the misfortune of a wicked heart. He continued, Melusina had no choice. She could not go back, return to the castle. She could not tell what happened to her husband. So she slithered out of that bathtub and she glided out of that open window, and his silvery tail disappeared from view as she floated to the river valley below. The Count never saw his wife again. Some say she emerges from her watery home once every 7 years, swimming through the river below, gently flipping her fishtail. He stopped. Wow, I said. That's a pretty amazing story. Did you know, the maitre d' turned to Mark and I, and he said, did you know that Melusina still holds the golden key to that small rocky chamber in her mouth? She still does. We shook our heads. No, we didn't know. They say, he said, whoever takes that key from her will free her from being a mermaid and may even claim her as their bride. Now others say she's quilting a blanket 1 stitch per year. He leaned forward, and if she completes this blanket before she's freed, Luxembourg will sink into the valley and vanish along with her. And there he stopped. With a deep sigh, he leaned back in his chair. With his hand folded across his stomach, he looked up at the ceiling, as if contemplating the disappearance of his very nation. No one said a word, even the old man. What a story, I said. The maitre d' stood up. The old men turned back to their drinks and card game, and the waiter walked back into his kitchen. With a satisfied smile, the maitre d' walked away as well. I guess it was time for us to leave. Mark and I walked out of the magical place into the cobblestone streets, saying a warm goodbye to the storytelling maitre d' of Luxembourg. And you know what? We were grateful that that fancy restaurant up above had turned us down. The end. That is all for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned next week for a new story from the Accidental Traveler.